Late one rainy evening, Maria sat at the kitchen table of her small rundown apartment. The flickering light overhead illuminated the unopened stack of bills that threatened to consume her every waking moment. Her 7-year-old son, Jamie, was playing quietly in the corner with his second-hand toys, blissfully unaware of the financial struggles his mother was battling. Maria's life was a constant struggle between working multiple shifts at the local diner and ensuring Jamie never felt the full weight of their circumstances. Tonight, however, the situation felt especially bleak. Jamie had been diagnosed with asthma, and the doctor had prescribed a nebulizer and medications that Maria couldn't afford. The thought of her son struggling to breathe while she fought to keep a roof over their heads tore at her heart. She knew she needed to do something, anything, to change their circumstances. As she sipped her now cold cup of coffee, Maria noticed an advertisement in the classifieds section of the newspaper. The ad read, "Personal attendant wanted, discreet, trustworthy, willing to provide unconventional services. High compensation, call for details." Maria frowned, her mind racing with doubts. She had seen strange job postings before, but something about this one caught her attention. The promise of high compensation felt like a lifeline thrown into her sinking ship. Desperate, she dialed the number. A man with a deep, calm voice answered, explaining that the position involved caring for an eccentric billionaire named Mr. Roderick Hayes. "He's very particular," the man said, "but the pay is substantial." Maria hesitated, but agreed to meet for an interview. She had no choice. Jamie's health depended on it. The next morning, Maria found herself standing outside an enormous modern mansion perched on a hill. She clutched her worn purse tightly, feeling out of place as the sleek black gates opened to let her in. A butler greeted her and led her into a grand living room, where she was introduced to Mr. Hayes himself. Roderick Hayes was a tall, imposing man in his late 40s, with sharp features softened by the hint of sadness in his eyes. He studied Maria carefully before speaking. "I need someone who's reliable and open-minded," he said, his tone serious. "The work will involve tasks others might find unconventional." Maria swallowed her nerves and nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes. I just need to take care of my son." Roderick raised an eyebrow at her response but didn't press further. "Very well, you'll start tomorrow. But remember, discretion is non-negotiable." As Maria left the mansion, a mix of relief and apprehension washed over her. She had secured the job, but the mysterious nature of the work left her with a nagging sense of unease. Still, as she glanced at a photo of Jamie she kept in her purse, she reminded herself that this was for him. No matter what lay ahead, she would face it with courage for her son's sake. The next day, Maria arrived at the Hayes mansion promptly at 8 a.m., dressed in her best attire, a modest blouse and skirt that had seen better days. She couldn't afford to make a bad impression. As she stepped inside, she was met by Mr. Hayes's butler, Edward, who explained her first task with an air of secrecy. "Mr. Hayes has very specific routines," Edward said, his voice low and formal. "Your primary responsibility today is to assist him during his morning ritual." Maria's brow furrowed. "Morning ritual?" she asked hesitantly. Edward nodded but offered no further explanation, only gesturing for her to follow him. They walked down a long hallway adorned with priceless artwork and into a luxurious private spa area. The room was immaculate, with marble floors, gold accents, and an enormous sunken bathtub surrounded by soft, glowing lights. Mr. Hayes stood nearby, dressed in a robe. He acknowledged Maria with a curt nod, then addressed her directly. "Maria, your job is simple. Assist me as needed during my bath. I've had attendants before, but most lacked the patience or empathy required for this task." Maria blinked, unsure of how to respond. She had imagined cleaning or administrative tasks, not this. But she reminded herself why she was there. Jamie. She straightened her shoulders and nodded. "Of course, Mr. Hayes, whatever you need." As the task began, Maria carefully followed his instructions, handing him towels and adjusting the water temperature as he requested. Though it was unconventional, The job wasn't as uncomfortable as she had feared. What struck her most was the vulnerability Mr. Hayes displayed. For a man of immense wealth and power, he seemed strangely fragile in these moments. At one point, he broke the silence. "Do you know why I hired you, Maria?" he asked, his voice soft. "Sir." "I assumed it was because of my application and my determination," she replied cautiously, not wanting to offend him. Mr. Hayes gave a faint smile, but there was something deeper in his expression, a trace of melancholy. "Not entirely. I could have chosen anyone. But when I read about your struggles as a single mother, something resonated with me." He paused, his gaze distant. "You remind me of someone I once knew, someone I let down." Maria didn't press further, sensing the weight of his words. Instead, she focused on completing her duties with care. As she handed him a towel and helped tidy up the spa area, she couldn't help but feel that Mr. Hayes's demeanor wasn't just about wealth or power. There was pain, regret, and something profoundly human beneath his cold exterior. After the morning ritual, Mr. Hayes dismissed her for a short break. Maria sat in the expansive kitchen, sipping tea provided by Edward. Her mind raced with thoughts about Mr. Hayes. What was his story? Why did he seem so guarded, yet so drawn to her and her son's struggles? Edward interrupted her thoughts, appearing at the kitchen door. "Maria, Mr. Hayes would like to speak with you in his study. It's unusual for him to do so on the first day." Heart-pounding, Maria followed Edward to the study. The room was filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, intricate woodwork, and a grand desk where Mr. Hayes sat. He gestured for her to sit across from him. "I want to make something clear," he began, his tone measured. "This arrangement is not just about work. I believe you're someone who could teach me something I've forgotten, about resilience, about life outside these walls." Maria was taken aback. "I'm not sure what I could teach someone like you, sir," she said honestly. Mr. Hayes shook his head. "You've already begun, Maria. Let's see how the days unfold. For now, focus on your work and your son. We'll speak again soon." As Maria left the study, she couldn't help but feel that her new job was more than just a way to provide for Jamie. There was a deeper purpose, one that might change not just her life, but Mr. Hayes's as well. What that purpose was, however, remained to be seen. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Maria. Her mornings began early, tending to Mr. Hayes's strict routines, and her evenings were spent helping Jamie settle into their new surroundings. The mansion felt like another world, ornate, sprawling, and eerily quiet. Yet, within its walls, Maria began to see glimpses of something unexpected: Mr. Hayes's humanity. One morning, as Maria prepared the bath, she noticed Mr. Hayes sitting by the window, gazing out at the sprawling garden below. The usual air of authority was replaced by a distant, almost vulnerable expression. She hesitated before speaking. "Is everything all right, Mr. Hayes?" she asked cautiously. He didn't respond immediately, but eventually, he sighed. "You're a mother. You must understand the lengths you'd go to protect your child, no matter the cost." Maria nodded, her heart tightening at the thought of Jamie. "I'd do anything for him. He's my entire world." Mr. Hayes turned to her, his eyes revealing a mix of pain and regret. "Then you'd understand why I work so hard, why I built this empire. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of the very things I wanted to protect." Maria didn't pry further, sensing he wasn't ready to share more, but his words lingered in her mind. Over the next few days, she noticed subtle changes in him. He began asking her questions about Jamie, about her life before working at the mansion. Though his demeanor was still guarded, there was an undeniable warmth creeping through his cold exterior. One evening, Maria was surprised to find Mr. Hayes in the kitchen. He stood awkwardly near the counter as she prepared dinner for Jamie. "You cook for him every night?" he asked, his tone curious. Maria smiled. "It's the least I can do. He's been so patient with all the changes. I want him to feel at home, even here." Mr. Hayes watched her for a moment before speaking. "May I join you?" Maria was stunned but nodded. Mr. Hayes took a seat at the table, observing as Maria prepared a simple pasta dish. Jamie, initially shy, warmed up quickly when Mr. Hayes asked about his favorite toys and school subjects. By the time dinner was served, the atmosphere in the kitchen felt almost familial. Mr. Hayes even helped Jamie with his homework, a sight Maria never imagined she'd see. As she watched them, she realized that Mr. Hayes wasn't just a hardened businessman. He was someone yearning for connection, someone haunted by his past. That night, as Maria tucked Jamie into bed, he asked a question that caught her off guard. "Mom, is Mr. Hayes lonely?" Maria hesitated. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" Jamie shrugged. "He's nice, but he looks sad sometimes, like he doesn't have anyone to play with." Maria hugged her son tightly, her emotions swirling. Jamie's innocent observation echoed what she'd been feeling. Mr. Hayes wasn't just her employer. He was a man searching for something he'd lost, and perhaps, in their own way, Maria and Jamie were helping him find it. The days continued like this, each one peeling back another layer of Mr. Hayes's enigmatic personality. Maria began to feel a growing sense of purpose, as though she wasn't just working to provide for Jamie, but also playing a role in helping Mr. Hayes rediscover the parts of himself he'd buried. However, the deeper she got to know him, the more questions she had. What had happened in his past to make him so closed off? And why had he chosen her, specifically, to work in such an intimate role in his life? The answers, she suspected, would change everything. One evening, a month into her job, Maria was summoned to Mr. Hayes's study. The large oak door loomed before her, and she hesitated, unsure of what to expect. When she entered, she found Mr. Hayes sitting behind his massive desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His usually impenetrable expression was softened, and his eyes held a glimmer of vulnerability. "Maria, sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. She obeyed, her heart pounding. Was she about to be fired? Had she done something wrong? For a moment, he simply stared at the glass in his hand, as though gathering his thoughts. Then he spoke. "You've probably wondered why I chose you for this job," he began, his voice quieter than usual. Maria nodded slowly. "I have, but I didn't think it was my place to ask." He leaned back in his chair, the weight of his words evident. "Years ago, I had a family, a wife and a daughter. My world revolved around them, but I was too focused on building my empire. I missed birthdays, school plays, even the little moments that mattered. I thought I was protecting them, but in reality, I was pushing them away." Maria's breath caught. She hadn't expected such a personal revelation. "One day," he continued, his voice breaking slightly, "they were gone. My wife filed for divorce, and my daughter, she chose to stay with her mother. I lost them because I was too blind to see what truly mattered." He looked at Maria, his eyes filled with regret. "When I met you and Jamie, it reminded me of what I'd lost. You've shown me something I thought I'd never feel again. Hope. The way you care for your son, the sacrifices you've made, it's incredible, and it made me realize I've been living a hollow life." Maria didn't know what to say. The man who had once seemed cold and distant was now baring his soul to her. "I want to change," he said, his voice firm, "and I want to help you and Jamie, not just because you work for me, but because you've given me a reason to care again." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes. She had never expected this kind of honesty, nor the generosity that followed. Mr. Hayes handed her a document, a trust fund he'd set up for Jamie's education and future. "This is my way of saying thank you," he said. "You've given me something money can't buy, a chance to be human again." Maria was overwhelmed. "Mr. Hayes, I don't know what to say. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart." He smiled, a genuine warmth in his expression. "No, Maria, thank you." From that day forward, their dynamic shifted. Mr. Hayes became more than just an employer. He became a mentor to Jamie, a friend to Maria, and someone who was finally learning to heal. The mansion, once cold and lifeless, began to feel like a home. Maria realized that life had an unexpected way of bringing people together, often in the most unlikely circumstances. Through compassion and understanding, she and Mr. Hayes had both found something they desperately needed: a second chance at happiness and a family that transcended blood.